Hello and welcome to our London History Podcast, where we share our love of London, its people, places and history. It's designed for you to learn things about London that most Londoners don't even know. I am your host, Hazel Baker, qualified London tour guide and CEO and founder of londonguidedwalks.co.uk. Each episode is supported by show notes, transcripts, photos and further reading, all to be found on our website. Click on londonguidedwalks.co.uk, podcast, and then select the episode that you fancy. And if you enjoy what we do, then you'll love our guided walks and private tours that we offer throughout the year. So get that cup of tea, put your feet up, and enjoy. Today we journey through the cobbled streets of Clerkenwell to uncover the story of Little Italy, a tale of migration, resilience and transformation that shaped London's heart for over a century. By the 1830s, Clerkenwell, Saffron Hill and Hatton Garden had become the nucleus of London's Italian population. Early arrivals were skilled artisans, glassblowers, scientific instrument makers, engravers, mainly from northern Italy. As the century progressed, waves of poorer, unskilled migrants from central and southern Italy joined them, driven by poverty and lack of opportunity at home. Most Italians came to Britain in the second half of the 19th century as poor and uneducated economic migrants. Their regional costumes, languages, Catholic faith and extended family structure distinguished them from the host community. Many of these newcomers settled in the slums of Hatton Garden, Saffron Hill and Nether Lane, and they were overcrowded. The poverty was endemic. Houses could contain as many as 50 people living in crowded and insanitary conditions. But I get ahead of myself. Let's begin our journey by stepping back into Victorian London. It's a Sunday night in May in the year 1863. Imagine yourself standing at a crossroads, surrounded by the hum of the city, the scent of roasting chestnuts and the echo of Italian voices drifting through the air. To the south of Little Italy, Clerkenwell Road runs past the iconic facade of the brand new St. Peter's Italian Church, the first Italian basilica-style church built outside Italy. Head east and you'll find Farringdon Road, lined with proud brick warehouses. And to the north is Rosebery Avenue, which curves towards Exmouth Street, once home to Joseph Grimaldi, the legendary clown whose Italian family helped shape London's theatre scene. At the very heart of this triangle lies Saffron Hill, the pulsing core, if you will, of Little Italy, immortalised by Charles Dickens as one of London's most notorious area. The streets rang with the music of barrel organs and the cries of hokey-pokey men selling penny ices. Locals once called this patch Hockley in the Hole, a mecca for entertainment for bear baiting, broadsword fighting, and the odd local catfight. And you can hear more about its earlier life, Hockley in the Hole, in episode 6. But for now, in 1863, it's known as Little Italy, where every street tells a story. And Dickens knew this area intimately, and he drew on these scenes for his novels. In Oliver Twist, he sets Fagin's den amongst the maze of small streets, alleyways and courtyards of Saffron Hill, and his description is unflinching. A dirtier, more wretched place he had never seen. The street was very narrow and muddy, and the air was impregnated with foul humours. There were a good many small shops, but the only stock in trade appeared to be heaps of children who, even at this time of night, were crawling in and out at the doors or screaming from the inside. Covered ways and yards disclosed little knots of houses where drunken men and women were positively wallowing in filth. What was Oliver Twist letting himself in for, eh? Now, to truly understand how Italian immigrants transformed Clerkenwell, let's take a walk down one of its most storied streets, and that's Eyre Street Hill. In Little Italy, one Sunday night, framed in the tone shop's amber light, a wine shop still the bush displaying, she lingers in the London night, while Tito tender things is saying, a Southern Jack and a Southern Jill, and love's romance in Eyre Street Hill. The crowded street, the narrow ways, closed sheds with rusty looks and styles have vanished from my wandering gaze. The night is May. The scene is Naples, when Beppo eyes with looks to kill the favoured swain in Eyre Street Hill. Soft from a room above the sign, there comes the hymn their preferari play to the dear Madonna's shrine. When falls the night serene and starry, and soft Italian zephyrs fill the frosty courts of Eyre Street Hill, the grey fog wraps the sombre street. A funeral pall the city covers, built in the London bywall meet the picturesque Italian lovers, their song and sunshine with them still, in Italy on Eyre Street Hill. Now, this romanticised poem invokes a dreamy, sun-soaked vision of Little Italy, filled with music, love, and devotion. And the sun, of course, is from the inside, fighting against this London cool and greyness. Now, transforming Clerkenwell's back streets into a kind of inner city Naples, but really, the many who lived here, it was even far less idyllic. This is where strong community bonds and cultural traditions were undoubtedly present, and in daily life, this part of what was once known as an area of Finsbury often meant overcrowded housing, low paid work, and limited opportunities. For many Italian Londoners, the sounds of devotion and the colours of festivals offered fleeting relief from the harsh conditions of urban poverty. It was on Eyre Street Hill in the late 19th century that Giuseppe Chiappa's organ work stood, a workshop that would shape the very soundscape of Victorian London. Chiappa and his family were more than just instrument makers. They were the creators of the hand-cranked barrel organs, whose lively tunes became the soundtrack of the city's neighbourhoods. These weren't just simple music boxes, they were marvels of ingenuity, crafted with precision and care. Each organ, with its wooden pipes and intricate mechanisms, could fill a street with music, waltzes, marches, and popular songs of the day. By 1871, half of all working Italian men in Clerkenwell were street musicians, and many of them rented their organs directly from Chiappa's workshop at Eyre Street Hill. 10 years later, in the 1881 census, it shows Chiappa, now aged 52, as piano organ maker, and is no longer living above the workshops but residing at 21 Tysoe Street in Clerkenwell with his wife Rosa and 7 children. The business didn't just supply instruments, it created a whole ecosystem. Chiappa offered not only the manufacture and repair of organs, but also the training of performers and even the publication of music books. The workshop was a hive of activity, with apprentices learning the craft and musicians coming and going, collecting their instruments for another day's work on the streets. For many Italian migrants, the barrel organ was more than a means of survival. It was a way to bring a piece of home to the bustling and often unfriendly streets of London. The music they played was a bridge between cultures, a reminder of village festivals and family gatherings back at home. And for Londoners, especially children, the arrival of the organ grinder was a highlight of the day, an invitation to dance, to sing along, or simply to pause and enjoy a moment of joy among the city's relentless pace. The influence of Chiappa's organ works extended far beyond Clerkenwell. Their instruments could be heard across the capital from the East End to the West End, in markets, parks, and outside public houses. The melodies became woven into the fabric of London life, echoing in collective memory long after the last organ had fallen silent. Street music and barrel organs played a defining role in shaping London's urban soundscape, especially during the 19th century, both as a source of vibrant public culture and also as a focus point for debates about noise, class, and urban identity. Barrel organs and street musicians were omnipresent in Victorian London, with estimates of over 1,000 organ grinders active by the 1860s. Their music filled the streets from early morning until late at night, blending with the cacophony of horse-drawn traffic, street vendors, and the daily urban bustle. And the sounds of the barrel organ became emblematic of the city's working class neighbourhoods, especially in the areas of Saffron Hill and Clerkenwell's Little Italy, where many of the Italian migrants lived and worked. Now, street music was more than just background noise. It helped create a sense of community and belonging, especially among immigrants and working class Londoners. And performances in public spaces broke down social barriers and provided shared experiences, fusing the city with creativity and cultural expression. However, they also created controversy and class tensions. For many middle and upper class residents, barrel organs symbolised unwanted noise and social disorder. Complaints about the organ nuisance were common, with writers like Charles Dickens, Thomas Carlyle, decrying the constant disruption to constant peace and intellectual work. Dickens famously described the street musicians as brazen performers on brazen instruments, beaters of drums, grinders of organs, bangers of banjos, clashers of cymbals, worriers of fiddlers, and bellowers of ballads. Dickens said he couldn't write for more than half an hour without being driven to distraction by the most excruciating sounds imaginable. Carlyle went so far as to install a soundproof room in his Chelsea home to escape what he called vile organ grinders. And these street performers, most often Italian immigrants, would wheel their barrow organs from street to street, cranking out the same tunes until someone paid them to move on. And for one man, this wasn't just background noise, it was a personal torment. Charles Babbage, the mathematician and inventor now hailed as the father of the computer, was a man who prized order, logic, and above all, quiet. In his leafy western neighbourhood, he found himself besieged by what he called instruments of torture, permitted by the government to be in daily and nightly use in the streets of London. Organs, fiddles, bagpipes, drums, and more. He once calculated that a quarter of his working life over 12 years had been destroyed by these nuisances. In just 80 days, he tallied 165 interruptions, each one, he believed, stealing precious hours from his work on the difference engine and the analytical engine, the world's first mechanical computers. Babbage didn't just grumble, he fought back. He paid musicians to leave. He called the police. He even appeared in court, arguing that street music was ruining the productivity of London's intellectual class. He wrote pamphlets and lobbied Parliament, his words dripping with frustration. It is difficult to estimate the misery inflicted upon thousands of persons and the absolute pecuniary penalty imposed upon multitudes of intellectual workers by the loss of their time, destroyed by organ grinders and other similar nuisances. His vehement campaign against organ grinders is steeped in a profound technological irony. The barrel organ's mechanical programming closely mirrored the core principle of his own pioneering computing designs. Both systems relied on encoded instructions to automate complex tasks, music for the organ, calculations for the engine. Yep, Babbage viewed the former as a torment and the latter as progress. Finally, in 1864, Babbage's campaign paid off. Parliament passed the Act for the Better Regulation of Street Music in the Metropolis. Now, if a homeowner objected, police could order street musicians to leave and arrest them if they refused. But victory came at a cost. Babbage became infamous among London's buskers. Organ grinders would gather outside his house, playing louder and louder than ever, especially as he lay dying in 1871. It's said they serenaded his deathbed with their music, a final, noisy act of revenge. It wasn't just intellectuals who had it in for organ grinders, oh no. Middle-class and elite Londoners frequently described Italian organ grinders as infesting the streets, using language more commonly reserved for pests or vermin. Letters and articles in the press referred to them as Savoyard fiends or blackguards, and accused them of smelling of garlic and goat skin, drawing on ethnic stereotypes in further distance them from the respectable British public. The Saffron Hill neighbourhood was depicted as overcrowded and unsanitary, reinforcing prejudices about immigrant communities. It was suggested that they infest the streets, having brought a certain vice from Italy, or meant that the streets swarm with vagabonds. The noise of the barrel organ was framed as an intrusion, not just into public space, but into the private, domestic lives of the middle classes. The music's property of penetration and ubiquity meant, as one commentator put it, there was literally nowhere to hide in these urban spaces, either public or private, from such street music. This was more than a nuisance. It was seen as a violation of the boundaries between class and between Englishness and foreignness. Victorian satire and journalism amplified these themes. Political cartoons, like those of John Leach in The Punch, depicted organ grinders as ruffians, their foreign noises castrated with the refinement of British music and art. Investigative journalists, often in disguise, ventured into Italian neighbourhoods to report on the supposed threat by these immigrants, describing them as thieves, extortionists, and public nuisances. Their reports were aimed at a middle-class audience, reinforcing social hierarchies and the idea that Italian organ grinders were both oral and moral pollutants. Newspapers often debated such ideas, using them to comment on broader social and cultural tensions, including attitudes towards immigrants and the urban poor. A passage in the Atlas, November 1857, was written with heavy irony, sarcasm, and wit. It mocks both the defenders and critics of organ grinders, exaggerating their arguments to highlight their absurdity. The writer's own position is clear. Street organs are a noisy nuisance, and the supposed benefits are laughable. Here's an extract. Every journal in London has felt itself called upon to speak of the great organ question, which is now agitating all of London. And it appears that some of the writers actually like organs. The others, who like music, object to the organ nuisance for a variety of reasons, and some of these reasons are so very far-fetched that one would imagine it was necessary to stand upon ceremony with the Sardinians and Savoyards who infest our streets, making days hideous with their series of screeching in triple or quadruple time, which our barbarous and inhumane defenders dignity with the time of heirs. They continue. In the same way, where a man who prefer porter to champagne, and who would rather hear a low comedian's quawl at a penny gaff than listen to Miss Pine warbling at the Lyceum, the great reason why the Saturday Review would encourage the demons in Sardinian form who are fast making our streets uninhabitable, yet have to be mentioned. Street music, according to the organ grinder's friend, has a great effect in preserving the morals of servant maids. why the absence of organs, that is to say, of organised screeching, should drive a servant girl to a hopeless course of vice, we are somewhat at a loss to understand. Neither do we comprehend why a set of Sardinian beggars who, instead of offering for sale the harmless Lucifer box or the almost equally offensive tract, carry out with them the most hateful devices for extortioning money. We do not comprehend, we repeat, why these miscreants are to be called art ministers. Oh dear. But even the courts couldn't agree on how to deal with organ nuisance, if at all. One applicant at North London Police Court on a Saturday was a man who complained of a very powerful organ which was kept playing from early morning till late night and deprived him of all rest. The magistrate is reported to have said, "Mr. Fordham, your only remedy is by injunction the High Court. The organ may annoy you, but it is not a cock and is not a dog. It does not crow and it does not bark. Consequently, a police magistrate has no power." The applicant left court looking very dejected. In June 1895, the Marylebone Mercury reported that Gidea Nobertali, 44, an Italian organ grinder, was charged with persistently playing an organ to the annoyance of Richard Murray after having been asked to desist. Murray, the caretaker of a house in Berkeley Street, said that on Friday evening the prisoner playing an organ outside the house and one of his children was being ill and asked the prisoner to go away. He refused and continued to play for about 20 minutes after he was requested to desist. The prosecutor said he would send for a policeman, and the prisoner, using a coarse expression in English, said he could do so. Eventually, a constable was sent for and the man given into custody. Mr. Newton imposed a fine of 20 shillings with an alternative of 14-day imprisonment. The controversy surrounding street music in Victorian London was closely tied to prevailing attitudes toward immigrants, especially Italians, who were the most prominent and frequently blamed among street performers. Complaints about organ grinders and other street musicians often went beyond objections to noise. They were steeped in xenophobic rhetoric and reflected deeper anxieties about class, foreignness, and social order. And beneath these grievances lay a broader unease about immigration and the rapidly changing character of the city. Organ grinders, Italian in particular, became associated with the public imagination with vice, criminality, and even exploitation, as many were believed to be under the control of padroni, employers who profited from their labour under questionable conditions. This narrative painted Italian street musicians not merely as a nuisance, but agents of a supposed alien invasion that threatened English values and society. The relentless chorus of complaints from London's middle and upper classes echoed in the newspaper columns, courtrooms, and even Parliament, eventually forced the city's lawmakers to act. The most significant response came in the form of the Street Music Act of 1864, and this legislation empowered householders to demand the removal of street musicians from their vicinity. Now, this was more than just a law about noise. It marked a profound shift in how Londoners understood and regulated public space. For the first time, the soundscape of the city, who could make noise, where, and for whom, became a matter of legal control. The Act signalled a new era in the policing of urban life, where the preferences of the settled, property-owning classes could override the traditions and livelihoods of street performers, many of whom were immigrants or from the working poor. The Act was controversial. Supporters hailed it as a victory for peace and order, with one MP declaring that the right to quiet enjoyment of one's own home is sacred. Critics, however, saw it as an attack on the city's character and a blow to the poor. Some argued that street music was the only sunshine in the lives of the labouring classes, and that silencing it would make the city a colder, less welcoming place. Yeah, despite the new restrictions, street music proved remarkably resilient. Musicians adapted, finding new ways to perform, new instruments to play, and new audiences to entertain. The character of street music evolved with the times. Barrel organs gave way to accordions, fiddles, and eventually amplified guitars and portable speakers. The debates of the Victorian era about noise, public space, and who gets to shape the city's atmosphere never truly disappeared. Today, these same questions resurface in discussions about busking, noise ordinances, and the role of public performance in city life. Should buskers be licensed? How loud is too loud? Who decides what belongs in the shared soundscape of a modern metropolis? The legacy of the Street Music Act lives on, not just in the laws on the books, but in the ongoing negotiation between order and vibrancy, tradition and change. And that defines London's streets. In essence, the story of street music regulation is the story of London itself, a city constantly reshaped by the push and pull between authority and freedom, silence and song. Barrel organs and street music were central to the auditory identity of Victorian London, symbolising both the city's lively multiculturalism and the social tensions of urban life. They helped define the rhythms of daily existence, fostered community, and sparked debates about noise, class, and belonging that continue to resonate in the city's public spaces. Now, organ grinders were often boys exploited by padroni, these labour agents, and were a familiar sight and sound in Victorian London. It began when young boys from the Parma region of Italy began appearing in London shortly after the Napoleonic Wars. By March 1820, the Times noted growing public annoyance at the presence of numerous Italian boys roaming the streets with monkeys and white mice, appealing to the sympathy of passers-by. At least 2 Italian men had brought over 20 children from towns near Parma to London on 15-month contracts, specifically to beg. Each child was provided with a monkey, mouse, or squirrel, and upon completing their indenture, they were allowed to keep the animal and potentially start their own business. The trade proved highly profitable. After the summer of 1819, 2 Italian masters returned home with £50 in earnings. Initially, the children earned their living solely by exhibiting dancing animals. By the 1830s, their repertoire had expanded into including not just monkeys and mice and squirrels, but also dogs, tortoises, and even porcupines. The padrone would rent these animals to the children at a set daily rate. A tortoise or a box of white mice, for instance, was let at 1 shilling 6pence a day, whilst a porcupine, more sought after as there were only 2 in the city, cost 2 shillings 6pence a day. For 4 shillings, a boy could also hire a barrel organ. The dancing dogs were the most expensive at 5 shillings a day, but for that sum, the boy received 4 dogs in dresses, together with a spinning wheel, pipe, and tabor. By the 1830s, the children had begun to incorporate inanimate objects into their performances. A plain barrel organ, or an organ for waltzing figures, or even a box of wax figurines. According to an 1831 article in the Times, some of the boys could make as much as 6 or 7 shillings in a day, and one street child claimed to have earned 15 shillings in one day in Brighton with a dancing dog. Until the late 1830s, the Italian boys were chiefly known for displaying white mice. This is reflected in George Eliot's Middlemarch, set in that era, where Mrs. Cadwallader, upon learning that Dorothea would forfeit Casaubon's inheritance if she married Will Ladislaw, remarks that Dorothea might as well marry an Italian with white mice. Soon the boys began playing musical instruments in addition to exhibiting animals. In Dickens's Little Dorrit, Flora describes Italy as that land of poetry with burning mountains, picturesque beyond belief, though if the organ boys come away from the neighbourhood, not to be scorched nobody would wonder being so young, and bringing their white mice with them most humane. By the 1840s, the boys with white mice had become widely known as the organ boys. Henry Mayhew, the pioneering social investigator, also chronicled the district. The former capital town mansions, a slightly exaggerated description of the houses near the Cold Bath, dingy and distressed, in use as old furniture stores or lodging houses for single men, occupied by Italian immigrants, living in crowded and insanitary conditions and chiefly employed in the ice cream trade or other street-based activities such as organ grinding and hawking of plaster figures, and in the winter, hot chestnut vending. I think it's time for me to introduce Luigi Rabbiotti, who was one of the most notorious Italian padroni, labour agents, operating in London's Little Italy during the mid-19th century, and he was infamous for his exploitation of young Italian organ grinders and the squalid, overcrowded conditions in his lodging houses. Rabbiotti was born in Parma, Italy, and by the 1841 UK census, he was living in Leicester Street, Clerkenwell, a core area of London's Italian community. He was a shopkeeper and padroni, controlling a network of organ grinders, many of them boys and young men brought from impoverished Italian villages. Investigations by the Lancet in 1871 and contemporary health officers described Rabbiotti's lodging houses on Eyre Street and Leicester Street as filthy and grossly overcrowded. One report detailed his basement and his house in the back, sublet to organ grinders. The basement was formed into a sort kitchen, with shelves along the wall where the barrel organs might be deposited, a long table for the rolling out of macaroni. The floor, ceiling and walls were black with smoke and dirt. The house has no furniture, only double beds wherever they could be fitted. 2 or even 3 men slept in each bed. In 1864, the Times described the cramped and unsanitary homes of these musicians. In Eyre Place, as many as 14 organ grinders slept in one room, and not content with that, beds were made up on the staircases. In some cases, up to 27 people were squeezed into a single house, with beds crammed into every available space. Rabbiotti and other padroni recruited children from poor Italian families, promising work and better life in Britain. In reality, these boys were forced to hand over all their earnings, often subjected to beatings and neglect if they failed to bring in enough money. Children were also made to beg and perform with animals, and their living conditions left them vulnerable to disease and malnutrition. Rabbiotti did not formally charge rent to his workers, instead taking his share from leasing organs or a cut of their daily earnings. He instructed his men to deny paying rent to avoid prosecution under the Common Lodging House Act. The Leonardi case highlighted exploitation and created public outcry. The tragic death of Giuseppe Leonardi in 1845 is one example of the exploitation suffered by Italian child street musicians in Victorian London. Leonardi, just 15 years old, was one of the several boys under the control of Rabbiotti. These padroni, as I mentioned, brought the children from Italy to England under contracts, and they often amounted to forced labour, sending them out daily to earn money through street performance or begging. Leonardi's life in London was marked by poverty, illness, and abuse. Despite his deteriorating health, he was repeatedly forced to work. As the coroner later reported, Leonardi's lungs were one mass of disease. The boy had repeatedly complained of chest pain, but his pleas were ignored. Instead, Rabbiotti persisted in sending him out and beating him, demonstrating the padroni's complete disregard of the boy's well-being. When Leonardi died destitute in the street, his case drew public attention to the plight of Italian child performers. The authorities charged Rabbiotti with manslaughter, accusing him of causing the boy's death through neglect and cruelty. The trial revealed the grim realities faced by these children, many of whom were exploited and beaten if they failed to bring enough money. Although Rabbiotti was ultimately acquitted of manslaughter, the judge did not let him escape moral condemnation. In court, the judge delivered a severe reprimand, making clear that while the law could not convict him, society could not condone his actions. The case drew the attention of Italian political exiles in London, including the patriarch Giuseppe Mazzini, who described the padroni system as a species of white slave trade, a disgrace to Italy, to its government, and to its clergy, who might, had they chosen to do so, have prevented it. The scandal spurred the founding of the educational initiatives for destitute Italian boys, such as the school established by Mazzini in Hatton Garden. The Italian Benevolent Society was also founded to assist vulnerable Italians, with efforts to repatriate exploited children and provide them with shelter and employment. The specific plight of child musicians was largely ignored until later reforms in the late 19th century. The Elementary Education Acts, particularly in the 1870 and 1880 Acts, played a significant but indirect role in addressing the exploitation of child street musicians and performers, including those from Italian immigrant communities. The 1880 Elementary Education Act made elementary school compulsory for all children under the age of 10 in England and Wales. This legal requirement meant that children of school age could no longer legally spend their days working or performing in the streets. In theory, they're supposed to be in school. As compulsory education became the norm for English children, the presence of foreign children working in the streets became more conspicuous and less socially acceptable. This shift in attitude contributed to authorities and magistrates increasingly viewing Italian child street musicians as victims of exploitation, akin to beggars, rather than legitimate entertainers, and this led to more frequent detentions, placement in workhouses, and organised repatriations, often in cooperation with the Italian Benevolent Society. The Act provided a legal and moral framework for campaigners to demand that all children, regardless of nationality, be protected from exploitation and given access to education. This pressure gradually encouraged the extension of educational and child protection measures to immigrant children, though enforcement and coverage remained inconsistent for decades. As the music of the barrel organ fades into memory, so too does the world of Little Italy, a world built on hope, hard work, and the rhythms of migration. The Italian organ grinders of Clerkenwell left a mark on London far greater than their tunes alone. They brought colour, community, and a new cultural identity to the city's streets, even as they faced poverty, prejudice, and the threat of exploitation. Their story is more than nostalgia. It's a window into the struggles and triumphs of London's immigrant communities, and a reminder of how the sounds of the street can both unite and divide. The debates over noise, belonging, and public space that raged in Victorian times still echo today whenever a busker sets up on a busy corner or a new community finds its voice in the city. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Little Italy's musical past. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe and share it with a friend. We have a lot of free content, blog posts and other podcast episodes about Victorian London, and they can be found at londonguidedwalks.co.uk/history/Victorian. And we have a number of Victorian specific London guided walks for you to enjoy too. Come and join me on Victorian Covent Garden and we can hear about Victorian ice cream lovers. Check out londonguidedwalks.co.uk/guided-walks for our upcoming walks calendar. Until next time.